as people on both sides of the aisle have talked about, that we not stir up violence, that we not stir up violent rhetoric, and we have an organization that has represented to the public that it's nonpartisan, or at least bipartisan, and it's not for profit. And yet we've seen recently in their efforts to come after Justice Thomas and Justice Scalia that it has been anything but nonpartisan. It's been a fundraising effort by Common Cause, and so and I just read you some from their fundraising efforts. They're saying, make a gift today, make a donation, donate now, and it's all hinging on coming after Justice Thomas and Justice Scalia. And as I think most of you know, in the recent rally that was called against Justice Thomas and Justice Scalia, it ended up resulting in a rally afterwards that was encouraged and pushed by Common Cause. And of course we have footage of violent rhetoric saying string them up. We shouldn't have any organization, especially one that hides behind nonprofit status, out there stirring up hatred and animosity to the point that people would say they need to string up a justice of the Supreme Court and as well do away with his wife. There have been some outrageous things that have resulted from this fundraising gimmick by Common Cause. So we have put together a letter. There are a number of members that wanted to be here, but we've got markups going on all around the Capitol Hill. And so some of the members who feel very strongly about this, Dan Lundgren is one, former Attorney General from California, that we need to ask the Attorney General to investigate Common Cause and whether or not it is violating the laws and violating the charitable laws and hiding behind those in its partisan effort. Now, a good test, as a former judge, and I've got another former judge behind me here as well, a good test as to whether or not this is truly nonpartisan is to see whether or not Common Cause opened their mouths, lifted their pens, put their fingers to their keyboards when a leader, a national leader of the ACLU, went on to the Supreme Court and continued to sit in judgment on ACLU issues. You also can look at whether or not Common Cause has lifted a finger to point out problems with a Solicitor General going on the court and deciding cases that were generated while she was a part of this administration. Obviously, she hasn't recused herself, and Justice Bader Ginsburg has not as well, no matter whether spousal interests were involved. So you see right away, there's plenty of evidence to indicate that this is a very partisan organization, and especially when they go to the point of stirring up violence. So it's time to stop the masquerade. It's time for Common Cause to be investigated, or at least be honest enough to admit what it really is, a political organization that's hiding behind tax laws that it was not entitled to use. And that's why we're sending a letter to the Attorney General asking that they be investigated, that people elevate the rhetoric to the point of violence, that we run into trouble. And the rhetoric after this Common Cause effort that's just been going on, continuing to lambast two wonderful, great justices, that the rhetoric has gone to the point of threatening justices. It's got to stop, but Common Cause needs to be investigated for what they're doing. I'll also point out that as far as Justice Thomas's wife, isn't it interesting that if you are a liberal spouse of a justice on the Supreme Court, then that's okay. We'd never think that you would influence your spouse on the court. However, if you're a conservative who involves yourself and not only goes out and votes, but actually takes positions on issues, well, this group says you're not entitled to. And I would encourage you to read Justice Thomas's book, it gives you more insight into a great man, a great American who came from nothing. He knew the depths of poverty to which a person could fall in the United States, and yet rose from that of his own ability and his own intellect. And as we have seen, the high-tech lynching to which Justice Thomas referred in his hearing, that was just unparalleled in its brutalness, is now coming right back. They're still going after him. They as he points out in his book, and I read it a year or two ago, and was just really saddened, because you see, he dared to think for himself. And as he points out in his book, if you're an African American and you spout exactly what the liberal environment, Common Cause, a partisan group like that tells you to say, you're okay because you're still on the reservation. But how dare you, if you start to think for yourself and start to question, as Justice Thomas has done, because he has the intellect that causes him to do just that. So then to turn around and make money off going after a justice like that is just so uncalled for. And I'd be glad to take any questions. Yes, ma'am.
Have you seen the video?
I've seen parts of the video, yes.
It is not unlike some of the rhetoric that I've seen at some Tea Party rallies about the president and Mr.
And that's
Obama.
interesting. You know, there were allegations made about racial epithets being used right out here. And what it turned out, we couldn't find anybody. Nobody would take Andrew Breitbart up on his offer of $100,000 for any evidence that any of the Tea Party people that came up here had said anything. Now, I was in a unique position because when others were walking through the street, I wanted to get up on the sidewalks and go through the crowd and thank people. And so you ought to know that in that Tea Party group, about every 10 or 15 feet, as I went through shaking the hands and thanking people for coming, who were being very nonviolent but very strong-minded, I would meet someone who would say, I don't support you, I'm not for you, and they were just standing there. And so it's obvious, it's happened before, that there have been plants in conservative groups. We know that on 8/28, when Glenn Beck had the rally down here, the only people who carried signs with nasty messages, carried signs at all, and some of them were nasty messages, were people who were not conservatives, who were not there as part of Glenn Beck's calling, but were there to try to make conservatives look bad.
Could these have been plants at this event?
Pardon?
Could these have been plants at this event?
Not when the overall tone of the whole event is just like this, where they're saying these things are violent. I mean, you've got them on camera. It'll be hard, I mean, it'll be easy to go back and look these people up and see who they are. Whereas these other allegations against the Tea Party, they can't point to a specific individual and say, here this person is. So I think it falls flat. It's a good question.
Well, my question actually is, and it's been very isolated at the events that I've been to for Tea Party, but should there be investigations of the Tea Party groups as you're calling for an investigation of Common Cause? Do you think that they're on the same level?
The Tea Party groups make no bones about who they are and what they are. They are trying to move the political dialogue back to mainstream where it started with our founders. And so they make no bones about who they are. They're very honest about it. The problem is when you have a group masquerading as being nonpartisan and right down the middle, when everything they do is anti-conservative, anti-mainstream, and far left in its origin.
But should all of the threats be investigated, whether against Clarence Thomas or against the president?
Listen, if there's threats against the president, they absolutely need to be investigated, and actually you'll find they are investigated. That's a crime. So other questions? Yes, sir.
Are you asking the Attorney General to revoke your tax-exempt status or to open a criminal investigation? What specifically do you want?
We're specifically asking the Attorney General to open an investigation into Common Cause's tax-exempt status because it appears they're not what they're telling people they are. They're a very partisan group. So thank you. Good question. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Why do you think that this incident, which, as you pointed out, was on a prominent website, was on Big Government, why do you think that it hasn't gotten the mainstream media attention that other incidents of violent or hateful rhetoric have gotten?
Well, that's a question I really can't answer, but it seems that the mainstream media is not interested in covering things that seem to be supportive of the president that they got elected. The mainstream media did not do the homework on one candidate of the two that were the national candidates for president, and now it appears they're in a defensive mode to make sure that the candidate they got elected is adequately protected, and especially people that he appointed and put in high places. So at this rally, did you have a bipartisan group? You had Van Jones, for heaven's sakes, who was so embarrassing because of his far left and socialist antics that he had to be asked to remove himself from being associated at the White House. I mean, so this clearly was a partisan effort, and it needs to be looked into, and we're hopeful that this time the Attorney General won't turn a blind eye to things that are on video that should be investigated. But thank you. It sounds like we're going to need to run. We got votes. One more question if anybody has one. All right, well, thank y'all very much.